Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So, are you listening to your customers before launching a product or service? Or really, are you listening to those same customers before taking actions that can help drive better performance in any campaign? Do you have the right advertising for your target audience? And if that target is Gen Y or Gen Z, then do you have the right message for them, especially knowing that they react differently than other generations? Matt Britton is the founder and CEO at Suzy, a consumer intelligence platform. He's a speaker, author, and a subject matter expert at youth demographics with Gen Y and Gen Z. And on this episode, we'll discuss advice for entrepreneurs, consumer insights, advertising to Gen Y and Gen Z, and even a little story about Suzy. So let's tune in to a consumer insights expert with an insightful shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, please tell us a little bit about your career to date and your journey thus far.
Sure. So I'm Matt Britton. I've spent the last 20 years of my career really helping big brands, the new consumer, understand the change with the new consumer and how it impacts their business. I started an ad agency back in 2002 called Mr. Youth,
Yeah.
which was just created when the internet was first becoming a mainstream media consumption habit amongst young people. Built that agency up to about 500 people over the span of 12 years before it was acquired by the Publicis Group, which is a multinational
Oh, yeah.
advertising firm. And during that time, I worked with a good chunk of the Fortune 500, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Pepsi, et cetera, really helping them navigate what was really a turbulent time with this massive sea change happening with consumers, which is the advent and usage and deployment of not only the internet, but then social media. I then went on to write a book called Youth Nation, which was kind of a roadmap
Mm-hmm.
for businesses large and small in terms of how to go after this changing demographic. And then most recently joined a software company I had spun out during my agency days, originally called CrowdTap. And I drove sort of a pivot of this business and rebranded it last year called Suzy, which
Mm-hmm.
is a real-time consumer intelligence platform that is expanding very nicely, and it's something I'm really excited about.
Absolutely. So, a lot of the smart guys like you that I've had on over the course of the show, have been smart entrepreneurs that knew how to market their business well. And I've read a lot of books from entrepreneurs on that journey. I know one of the ones I've really enjoyed recently was Lost and Founder, but I've gotten a lot of insight from Rand Fishkin as well on his,
Hmm.
how he looks at the entrepreneurial journey. What are some of the things that you've gone through? What's sort of the advice that you give with guys that have been successful doing this over time? What are the ups and downs and things you wish you'd learned over time and through this whole process?
I mean, there's so many,
Oh
that's a
yeah,
book in itself in
I
terms
know.
of answering that. But if I had to boil it down to a couple of things, I think it's always taking advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you.
Hmm.
And as long as you have time, really go after as many things as you can in the early days.
Hmm.
Once you start to get more substantial as a business, you can say no more and become more focused. But you really never know where those leads are where the roads are going to lead. I think the same goes with contacts. I think one mistake I've made in the past is I would go to conferences and only look for the person who had Procter and Gamble or IBM on their
Oh,
badge and
absolutely.
not really
Yeah.
pay much attention to people who work for companies I've never heard of before. And that was a mistake because you never know. It's a long road. You never know where these people are going to end up. And you learn so much from talking to people. So go to as many events as you can, meet as many people as you can, and hold on to as many relationships as you can because relationships obviously are the golden currency in business. I think become a master of your craft, become a thought leader in your craft, create as much content as you can, try to teach. Don't worry about how many people like your
Couldn't
content.
agree more.
If one person likes it, then you're
100%.
impacting one person, which is a million times better than impacting nobody. And over time, the right people will gravitate towards you if you have mastered your craft and you love what you do. And I think if you have those pieces in place, you're more likely to not to be successful in what you do. If you have strong relationships, if you have passion for your craft, if you push things out there, if you don't just seek out the short-term opportunities, but take a long-term view towards relationships and business itself, I think you're really set up well for success.
Yeah, that was fantastic. So, with Youth Nation in particular, so a big focus of your thought leadership, and where I've seen you on different TV shows as well,
Uh-huh.
has been on millennials and Gen Z. How do you look at those
Yep.
groups today, and what kind of advice do you give brands on how to succeed and not fail in their efforts to market and or advertise them to them today?
Sure. Well, the reason that the millennial generation was such a big deal when they first became established consumers was that they were the first generation that grew up with the internet in the
Hmm.
household.
Hmm.
So that is a seismic shift in humanity that had never happened before and will likely never happen again. Those people's brains are wired differently. They intuitively understand products and themes in a much different way than Gen X and Boomers and everybody else who came before them. Gen Z, the shift from Gen Y to Gen Z or millennials to Gen Z, is going to be nowhere near as stark as a shift from Gen X
Exactly.
to Gen Y because those people also grew up with the internet in the household. Now, the best way to put it is it's going to be a more accelerated version because the rate of change is only going to accelerate. And a lot of the trends that Gen Y first adopted to really change their lifestyles and, in essence, change the world were already kind of table stakes for Gen Z. So instead of the phone being this massive shift in the lifestyles of millennials, now it's sort of the remote control operating system for Gen Z's lives.
Exactly.
They know nothing else, but it. So I think while with the millennial generation, we would tell brands, hey, you really need to go digital. You really need to embrace social media. With Gen Z, it's like if you don't, you don't exist. And I think
Exactly.
that's really the easiest way kind of to put it.
Yeah, I
And, and
agree.
and the last thing I'll add is with millennials, I think one big mistake a lot of corporations, large and small, are making is they're kind of trying to move on from millennials and go to Gen Z. But an argument we made that the biggest impact of millennials is yet to come because the oldest millennials are 38 years
Yeah.
old and they're just starting to enter the C-suite. So now they're becoming the CFOs of the household. They're becoming the CEOs and CFOs and CMOs of Fortune 500 brands. And these are people who grew up with the internet, so they look at the world completely differently. Instead of those traditional companies now being disrupted from the outside, people are going to come at the inside and disrupt these large organizations from within.
Agreed. So, you've spoken about the global millennial impact on international stages, and I'm actually just sort of
Yeah,
curious what you see. And I've asked this question to several different people over time. What similarities and differences are you seeing across the different borders as you look? Because you're working with a lot
sure.
of global brands as well that are not just speaking to millennials or the Gen Z in the U.S. They're speaking to that generation and the next generation across all kinds of borders.
It's been really fascinating. Like I was in Australia 2 years ago, and Amazon was just launching in Australia,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that was just so shocking to me. I was in Sweden earlier this year, and Amazon is just launching there. And a conversation I had with an executive there that works for Spotify, he told me a very interesting point was that maybe Sweden won't adopt Amazon because the way of living in Scandinavia is much different than the way of living
Hmm.
in America,
Hmm.
and people don't really need things right away. And will Amazon disrupt the cultural lifestyle of Sweden, or will the Scandinavian culture reject Amazon? So
Hmm.
these are things that you start to kind of take for granted living here in the bubble in America. But as you go to different places around the world, you quickly realize that every single country and every single nation is in a different stage of this development. You have some of the emerging markets in Africa, which skipped over landlines and are going, right to digital, but they're still, a developing nation, right? You have other areas like Singapore that already have the fastest internet in the world, and they're so much more advanced in certain areas. You have places like Western Europe that seem to be always kind of half a step behind the United States, but is going down the right path. And then you obviously have nations like Russia and North Korea and China, which have state-run media and tremendous censorship, and will never be a community and a citizenship like what we have here in the United States. So it's just so different around the world, and it's really fascinating to see.
Well, then with consumer insights, let's talk about that a little bit. I know that's a big
Yeah.
focus of your company now. I mean, do you look at the value of consumer insights as to be substantially more important today with millennials and or Gen Y and Gen Z, or is it
Yep.
really affecting all consumers? And I guess why or why not to that point?
Yeah. Well, the biggest difference is before the internet, before tools like YouTube, right, which gave consumers a voice, the decisions were really made from the boardrooms,
Hmm.
right? And businesses could kind of dictate commercialism. There was limited options for consumers to understand information, and if they ran a spot during the Ed Sullivan show, right, the whole family would sit around it, and they would get a 60% market share, and you'd be able to build brands.
Hmm.
And now it's kind of the polar opposite, where there's so much. Not only is there so much fragmentation, but the decisions aren't made from the boardroom; they're made from the sidewalks.
Hmm.
And consumers are really dictating the future of businesses. If a business wrongs a consumer, like on an airline, the whole world's going to find out about it instantly. And if a product is great, no matter if they're distributed in Walmart or not, or a band is amazing, and whether they're distributed on iHeartMedia or not, consumers are going to hear about it and they're going to push it up, and it's going to become a sensation. As a result, it's more important than ever before that businesses are listening to consumers,
Hmm.
because if consumers are dictating the future, businesses can't continue to make decisions in a bubble, which they've been doing. Traditionally, throughout my 12 years of running an agency, what I saw over and over and over again is that decisions were made at businesses by what we call the HIPPO, which is the highest paid person's opinion.
Hmm.
And those opinions were formulated by what the CMO discussed with their daughter that morning over breakfast. And now they're making multi-million-dollar decisions on behalf of a large organization. And that's just not the right way to do business
No.
in a world where you can actually have consumer input. And that's really why we built Suzy. And it's really taken off because companies have really embraced the notion of becoming consumer centric, of having the voice of the consumer have a seat at the table and really dictate decisions large and small.
Well, I really love the tagline actionable insights at the speed of culture. And one of the things
Yeah.
I find really interesting, especially, as a focus of just, to me, it's like A/B testing 101. It's fantastic to look to see that what works and what works quickly, not rely on that hippo as we discussed. But are you worried at all about, when you look at that and making those type of decisions on products or services, that we run the risk of making a decision too quickly when we do something like this, using not necessarily your product, but social or any form of advertising, where when we're evaluating, and I've run through this, when you run a campaign on Google, for example, a lot of
Uh,
people will run it through a week and then they make their decision based off that, or a weekend, and then that's how they make their decision over a year's planning. Yours hyper elevates that even faster, and it does give some great insight. But does the speed, is there ever a risk that you see with how speed can maybe hurt those results, or make people think twice about the results?
well, I mean, to me, having 500 consumers weigh in versus having no consumers weigh in is always better,
Yeah, I couldn't agree
because
more.
it
Yeah,
just becomes another voice in the room. Now, whether it has the precision of doing a 60 or 90-day, Ipsos study,
exactly.
obviously it doesn't. But the reality is that so many decisions need to be made so quickly that what we found is up to 95% of decisions that are made every day in business have no data behind it. So we're not competing against really traditional, sophisticated, comprehensive market research. We are competing against guesses and hunches. And there is room for guesses and hunches and instinct, but there's also a lot of room for just hearing what one consumer somewhere in Missouri thinks about a product that can really change the course of a way a company goes to market. And you look at some massive mistakes, whether it was like Pepsi and the Kendall Jenner ad, where you're like,
Oh
how
yeah,
could that ever have happened? And the reason why it happened is there probably wasn't enough voice of the consumer in the room, and it was done in a
absolutely.
bubble. And then there you go, you completely miss, and you see it happen over and over again. So it helps to avoid disasters, but it also helps to kind of think of things in a slightly different way, because a lot of these organizations, small businesses as well, you just kind of get caught up in your echo chamber, and you start to use phraseology that doesn't really exist out in the real world, and then after you actually start to listen to the consumer, you're like, wow, we are so far off.
Yeah, could agree. Great point. So, how are people using this through the funnel? I mean, is it on top, the middle, the bottom? Where do you sort of see people using this in the funnel?
Great question. So we have, just to oversimplify it, three archetypes of consumers. We have companies that are using it in the innovation phase. That's early in the product development pipeline to come up with new product extensions, new ideas. So if a food company wants to know if consumers would use Alexa in the kitchen to hear their recipes, there's no historical data for that, right? Because Alexa is just a relatively new phenomenon. So they want to ask consumers, are we going down the right path? So they are integrating it as part of an agile workflow to really work with the consumers to come up with new ideas in the innovation space. Then we have a lot of teams that are in the marketing side of things that are trying to figure out, what ad or what creative or what type of promotion will really resonate with consumers. And then we have traditional research and consumer insights teams that are adding this as part of their overall toolkit to basically mine consumer insights very quickly. Like, did you watch the World Cup last night? Did you see our ad?
Mm-hmm.
Are you planning on barbecuing this weekend for 4th of July?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a whole host of other very cool use cases. Like, I'm about to go on CNBC to talk about Facebook and the privacy issues that are continue to come up. And we ran a study today about the New York Times article that came out today. And then CNBC is going to be quoting research today on TV. So it allows the media really to have their finger on the pulse of consumers. We have private equity firms using it for equity analyst research on new investments or new recommendations they're going to be putting out. So all sorts of kind of different use cases where companies really just need to have their ear to the ground and understand what the consumer is thinking and feeling at any given time.
Agreed. I think it's great because it's predictive analytics with really listening to the actual consumer with that flavor. And and I'm going to transition then to TV, something that you speak a lot about as well, since you just mentioned it. I've heard you mention this before, but why do you sort of believe there's no future in TV advertising as we know it?
Well, I mean, there's no future in TV advertising as we know it because of a couple of factors. One is 5G. So when 5G gets deployed, companies like Verizon that are currently bringing fiber optics into the home are going to be replacing wired cable with, a new form of Wi-Fi and Apple TVs. The second that happens, now really consumers' kind of central operating system for the television is all streaming. It's no longer linear cable. And in a world where it's streaming, it all becomes addressable. And in a world where it becomes addressable, it becomes fragmented, where I can target somebody who lives within 10 miles of Duluth, Minnesota that owns a Ford Focus, right? And my ad will only run to them. That's a completely different world than where we are today, where $100 billion with a B of TV advertising gets spent during the upfronts and really targeting very cookie cutter 18 to 49 demographics.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why companies should be spending the bulk of their advertising dollars focusing, an audience as monolithic and wide as an 18 to 49 demographic when you can get super targeted. So enjoy really all the benefits of mass reach of television, but have the precision and targeting of going after consumers in a really data-driven way. And that's going to just create a dramatic disruption to the advertising, marketing, and media industry because there are so many companies that rely on just putting out $100 million insertion orders to Comcast, NBC Universal every single year during the upfronts and say, we're going to let them deal with it. But they're not going to be able to do that anymore. So they're going to need to mine consumer data, create deep consumer segmentation to push out messaging that's really relevant because that's what consumers are going to end up expecting. I have I use YouTube TV now. I'm officially a cord cutter, and I can tell you already the commercials I see are so much more relevant to me when I watch YouTube TV than they are when I watch traditional TV, and it's a more enjoyable experience. I'm actually less likely even fast forward it, believe it or not, because it's just so targeted and you can already start to kind of see it happening. But it's going to be the sort of thing like the switch is going to flip and it's just going to cause chaos, just like it did when iTunes came out and what happened to the music industry, or just like when Netflix started streaming and all of a sudden there were no DVDs, at the front of Walmart anymore. It just completely dominates an industry. It's going to happen with television advertising. It's just going to happen in an instant. And we're going to say we always saw it coming. And really 5G is the catalyst that's finally going to push it across.
Where do you think advertising is going for Gen Z and Gen Y and beyond over this near term future, especially if we start cutting cords, and how we're looking at those type of ads? How do you see the rest of paid social, paid programmatic display and things like that?
Well, I think things like search are going to change with voice, because instead of me having to go to Google and say where's the nearest pizza place, I'm going to ask Siri or Alexa, which essentially gives Amazon and Apple tremendous pricing pressure over Google, because basically, those search results could be delivered from anywhere. And if you get your device in the consumer's hand, that's why Google tried to acquire Motorola, because they wanted to have a handset in consumers' hands. That's why Microsoft tried to launch Windows Phone, because they bought Nokia, right? Because they wanted the handset in consumers' hands, and neither of them really succeeded And Apple obviously is clearly one when it comes to iOS and the iPhone, and Amazon has really started to dominate it when it comes to Alexa. So I think it's going to be interesting when it comes to search. Social, I mean, I think it's going to be social and TV are not going to be that much of a distinction moving forward, because in the world of programmatic, you're going to be able to buy programmatic targeted data driven ads on Facebook the same way you will on television, frankly the same way you will on radio.
Well, I've seen
And
you
in
though
that,
on TV interviews where you're telling a lot of people to put all their money into Facebook and social advertising as opposed to TV.
yeah, I mean, well, I think well, I never said put all your money into that, because I still
Sorry.
believe in things like the
Yeah.
Super Bowl
Agreed.
or Grammys or Oscars or the NFL. Like if I were a big brand builder, I would still spend money on the NFL, because the
Good point.
CPMs and the ROI is still really there. But I do think companies need to start to think about the shift that's going to happen, because the same way you buy on Facebook is going to be the same way you buy in the NFL. Once the DirecTV contract ends with the NFL and Amazon or Apple or Facebook get the rights to live NFL games, you're going to be able to run ads during NFL games to women that like Victoria's Secret, because the NFL is also the most watched live program
Yeah.
amongst women viewers.
Yeah.
Yeah, every ad you see is targeting Ford F-150s and Bud Light towards men, because you don't have the way to target those people. So what that's going to take for companies is a couple of things. One, they need first party data, because Coca-Cola still doesn't have any data of Coca-Cola buyers, because they've always sold through Walmart and Target, et cetera. They don't have any first party data. So how are they going to create deep consumer segmentation if they don't have first party data? So that's number one. Number two is they need a system that creates a long tail creative. Meaning you're going to have 1,000 different pieces of creative that talk to 1,000 different types of people that are going to convert and actually meet their needs. And then third, the whole kind of briefing process has to change from advertising the content, meaning moving away from what is our unique selling proposition and how are we going to cram it down consumers' throats, to what does my consumer care about when they wake up in the morning? Where do we fit in? And how do we create content that adds value? And a lot of the future of marketing isn't going to be marketing. It's going to be product building new products and product integration, like what you see Tide doing, building,
Yeah.
their own laundromats and things like that. That's kind of the new marketing. It's not just really advertising anymore either.
So, Matt, I know another thing that's really important to you is education and where we're going with that in the
Mhm.
future. Where do you see that progressing? And whip out the crystal ball and tell us where you see that going.
Well, I think the traditional 4-year college is going to start to come under a lot of pressure, because it's not really preparing us, students for the future of the workforce. I think we're going back to a world where you have so much automation, artificial intelligence, and jobs being eliminated as a result, that there really needs to be a focus on people going deep into an art or deep into a science. Deep into a science meaning learn how to operate, code, build the machinery, which is largely a technical skill, or
Mm-hmm.
going deep into an art, which is doing things that machines can't do. Whether you're a writer or you're a designer, or you're an artist, everything else in the middle is going to come under tremendous pressure. Obviously, you need to know general people and management skills,
Mm-hmm.
which I would argue you best learn not in school, but in being social and out in the real world in life, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the problem is that how many students do you have at college, becoming a jack of all trades, a master of none? And when those people go out into a workforce, CEOs in a cost cutting environment are going to just, if they have to tell somebody what to do, they're going to hire somebody in Costa Rica or India to do it, not overpay somebody in New York that has an expensive, rent bill to pay.
Right.
So you have these kids coming out of college with debt. There's over $1 trillion in student debt right now. They're taking jobs that they don't want to take to pay back the debt. Next thing they know, they have a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage, and then that's it. Their dream is over. The
Mm-hmm.
American dream gets stripped away because they've chased the money. They're working somewhere that they hate. They're working for a big company that can afford to pay them now, but it's probably going to be running out of money in 10 years from now. And then what do you do? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you see things like WeWork taking off. That's why you see things like Code Academy and Khan Academy, and WeWork investing in a whole new education system themselves,
Sure.
because they're realizing that the current education system's broken, and in a global economy, young people are not coming out of school prepared for what's going to happen. And it's something that I think really needs to be addressed, and it's going to happen from the private sector. Harvard's not going to reinvent their model anytime soon. The private sector is going to have to come in and disrupt, and I believe it will. I think that places like healthcare and places like education and financial services are the last things to truly be disrupted, because they have had the most amount of bureaucracy. But I think that you're going to start to see that happening in the years ahead.
Good points. Matt, it is that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Let's do it.
All right. Netflix or Amazon Prime?
Well, I use Netflix, but I believe Amazon Prime will be more successful five
Yeah.
years from now, dramatically than Netflix.
Good point. Agree. And why so?
Because Netflix, the only thing Netflix has as a differentiator is a
Original
checkbook,
content and
and
checkbook. Yep.
Amazon because and Amazon has a bigger checkbook, and
Exactly.
Amazon has way more revenue streams, and ultimately the best content creators will go where they get paid the most money. So Amazon has everything Netflix has and more because they have a bigger checkbook and ecosystem behind it.
And free 2-day delivery. So,
Yeah,
question number 2, Gen Y or Gen Z?
I like Gen Y because they were the original disruptors, and I think they are the generation that's going to still, has so much more damage to deliver. Although I have two children, which are each Gen Z, so I guess my heart is in the Gen Z space.
Sure. Number 3, Roku or Amazon Fire?
Can I say neither? Because I've tried Amazon Fire and it was a terrible device, and I'm an Apple TV guy, and I've never really even used
Okay.
Roku.
I'll take Apple TV as an acceptable answer. Number 4, LeBron James or Kevin Durant?
Kevin Durant, for many reasons.
Yes,
First
I
of
know.
which is he's an investor in Suzy.
Exactly.
I also think that he is somebody who still has his best years ahead of him, and I don't love what LeBron has done this year with the Lakers, with the
No.
whole Anthony Davis scandal and pushing out his theoretically, allegedly, pushing out his players through, indirectly through Rich Paul. And I just think I like the way KD goes about his business,
Yeah.
and I also love his interest in technology. But he's going to have to come and win on his own, and he very well may do that next year.
Well,
So,
Jordan
we'll
was better than the both of them, but that's my point of view. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
I think cornbread. I'm a cornbread guy versus biscuits.
Good man. So, one of the other most important questions I have to ask you is what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
I would say the hammerhead, just because I had a hammerhead toy shark when I was a kid growing
There
up,
you
and
go.
it's very nostalgic to me.
Yeah, sadly, I have a toy hammerhead now, and just, that's enough that anybody else needs to know. So, Matt, where can people find out more about you, read your thought leadership, and do some research and find out where you're speaking, your engagements, and things like that?
You got it. Everything and more is on my website, mattbritton.com. So you could find literally anything you need to know there. You can follow me on Twitter at MattyB, MATTYB. Those are probably the best places to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. Looking forward to continuing to follow your podcast, and best of luck.
Awesome. So there was my conversation with Matt Britton, the founder and CEO at Suzy, a consumer intelligence platform. He's a speaker, author, and a subject matter expert at youth demographics with Gen Y and Gen Z. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, as an entrepreneur, always take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you. Go after as many things as you can in the early days. He also went on further to make some great points when he said, and I quote, "You learn so much from talking to people, so go to as many events as you can, meet as many people as you can, and hold on to as many relationships as you can, because relationships obviously are the golden currency in business. Become a master of your craft. Become a thought leader in your craft. Create as much content as you can. Try to teach. Don't worry about how many people like your content. If one person likes it, then you're impacting one person, which is 1,000,000 times better than impacting nobody. And over time, the right people will gravitate towards you if you have mastered your craft and you love what you do." I could not agree more with Matt's point. Second, he brings up a good point in that the biggest impact to millennials is yet to come as they start to arrive at the age of the C-suite executives and as they make more impactful decisions in business based upon their backgrounds. Third, in regards to consumer insights, in the past, all businesses made decisions really by dictating the story. But since the internet, with the power of social and online reviews and things like that, now the consumer is driving a lot of that conversation. It's up to you as a business to listen and to not make decisions in a bubble. And quite simply, you've got to use insights from consumers in order to avoid a lot of the problems that so many bigger brands make. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been an honor for me to serve you today in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. Listen to your consumers, everyone. Whether it's one or many, just listen. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.